Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the presentation. Here, we are delighted to have Dr. Noelle Wakefield and also Katherine Mizrahi to speak to us about graduate school admission. Dr. Noelle Wakefield is the Assistant Director of Diversity Initiatives and the MIT Summer Research Program. Noelle brings more than 5 years of higher education administration, where she has worked to develop and implement various diversity initiatives, including graduate recruitment, development of grant proposal to fund diversity and inclusion initiatives, and co-leading the MIT Summer Research Program. Our other speaker, Katherine, has an undergraduate degree in material science engineering at MIT. As a PhD student in the program in polymers and soft matter, Katherine explores more how functionalization of polymers of intrastate microporosities influences their solid-state physical packing and subsequently their transport performance. During her PhD, Katherine has been recognized as an Ida M. Green MIT Fellow, a GEM Fellow, and an SF Graduate Research Fellow, and a Ford Pre-Doctoral Fellow. Outside of lab, Katherine is actively involved in diversity recruitment initiatives as a Graduate Community Fellow in the Office of Graduate Education. She has co-founded the Latinx Graduate Student Associations at MIT and works with the MIT undergraduate community as a graduate resident advisor. And now I'm going to lift the stage to them. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that amazing introduction. I'm going to share my screen with you all. We're so happy to be here with you all today to talk about all things graduate admissions. And specifically, we want to talk a little bit about MIT graduate admissions as well. So as mentioned, my name is Noelle Wakefield. I'm the Assistant Director of Diversity Initiatives in the MIT Summer Research Program in the Office of Graduate Education. I'm also joined by our graduate student, Katherine Mizrahi, who will introduce herself in just a moment. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am a Chicago native. I completed the entirety of my schooling in the Chicagoland area. So I received my Bachelor's of Science in Molecular and Microbial Biology from Chicago State University and completed my PhD at Northwestern in the Department of Molecular Biosciences. So after graduate school, I had a brief stint in industry where I worked for a national laboratory before returning to Northwestern for an administrative role in the graduate school. So currently I've been at MIT for a little over 2.5 years. And again, I help lead the MIT Summer Research Program and recruitment efforts of underrepresented and underserved populations to MIT graduate programs. Additionally, we support current students of colors by helping create community through a series of programs. And so now I wanted to hand it over to Katherine to do a brief introduction.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us here today, and thank you, Noelle, for passing over to me. I'm Katherine Mizrahi. I am a PhD student in the Materials Science Department here at MIT. I also did my undergrad at MIT in Materials Science, so I have experience being at MIT for a long time, which some of you may relate with. I'm originally from Venezuela. And then I moved to the US when I was 12 and lived in Florida. Go Gators. And I, at MIT, also work with the Office of Graduate Education with Noelle to carry out diversity initiatives, helping graduate students or prospective graduate students optimize their process in undergrad so that they can become really strong candidates. So I'm very excited to be here today to walk you a little bit more through that process.
So today we're here to talk about all things grad admissions, including what it means to pursue graduate education. We're also going to provide you with a brief overview of grad programs at MIT, also how to become a competitive applicant, and then finally, what to expect during the graduate application process and how you can best navigate. But first, I think it's best that we start from the beginning to even talk about what is grad school? What does it look like? How does it differ from undergraduate education? And on the left, you'll see my top 5 things about graduate school and what you can expect. So number one, successful graduate students are autonomous. So unlike undergraduate education, graduate school is less structured. So it requires independent thinking and students taking the initiative to figure things out on their own. Students may have to choose their own advisor, and it will really be up to you as a student with little guidance to kind of carve out an area of research and to find a thesis or a dissertation topic. It'll also be on you to create networks, and in short, you will be taking the initiative to create innovative and new ideas and research. So for graduate school, be prepared to take control of your own education. Second, graduate school is very different from undergraduate programs. So doctoral and master programs are nothing like college. If you're considering graduate school because you're doing well in college and you enjoy school, be aware that graduate school is going to be quite different than the last 16 or more years of school that you've experienced. Graduate study, especially at the doctoral level, is like an apprenticeship. So instead of sitting in class for a couple of hours a day and then being free, grad school is more like a job that occupies all of your time. And you'll spend a great deal of your time working on research in your advisor or mentor's lab. Next, graduate school means research. So while college is centered around classes, graduate school centers around research. So yes, you will take some courses, we'll get into that. But the purpose of doctoral education is to learn to conduct research. The emphasis is on learning how to gather information and construct knowledge independently. So as a research and even a professor, if that is the route you want to go, much of your job will consist of gathering materials, reading, thinking about what you've read, and designing studies to test your ideas. So graduate, especially doctoral education, is more preparation for a career in research. Next, doctoral study takes time. So a doctoral program on average is 5.5 years to degree. Usually the first years where you'll have a little bit more structure, so we'll dive into that with classes and lots of reading. Most students are required to pass exams at various points. And then after, there's less structure because you'll be working on research. And then finally, the dissertation determines your final outcome. So the doctoral dissertation is the basis for earning your PhD. You'll spend a great deal of time searching for a thesis topic and advisor, and then reading up on your topic to prepare your dissertation proposal. And once that's accepted by a committee, which is composed of faculty within the department, you'll plug away for years and years and years until you've conducted enough research to make conclusions and publish your work. So here I'm providing a generalized PhD timeline for what happens over the course of the 5+ years. So again, the average time to degree is about 5.5 years. In year 1 to 2, it is structured. So students are taking coursework, and then they're also taking this time to choose a thesis lab. In year 2, there's something called a qualifying exam that you would need to pass in order to become an official PhD candidate. In year 1 to 6, you're going to accomplish a body of research work that is equivalent or earns you enough to have authorship on primary literature. And typically programs will ask for 1 to 2 scientific papers. And then in your final year, you're going to be writing a thesis. So the thesis usually is a compilation of all the research that you've done over the course of the 5+ years and consists of also those papers that you've published. And you then defend that in front of your committee. Sounds easy enough, right? Keep in mind that most PhD programs do provide full financial support through a number of avenues that we'll talk about a little bit later on in this presentation. So why pursue graduate education? There are a number of reasons that you might be thinking about grad school. Maybe perhaps your dream career requires you to earn advanced degrees. So for instance, you definitely can't become a doctor or a lawyer without first completing a graduate education. But on other hands, perhaps you want to get into grad school because you're eager to receive specialized training and experience in the chosen field. Or maybe you're entering a competitive job market and you know that having an advanced degree will give you an edge over other applicants. And just so you know, only 13% of the US population holds a graduate degree. So that might be one of your motivators or strategies for moving up in the workplace. Or perhaps getting a bachelor's degree can only get you so far in your career field, and you want the type of upward mobility that graduate school can provide. So I think in short, there are so many reasons why people pursue a PhD. It is a personal decision. Thinking about what your end goals are and what your core values are will help motivate whether or not graduate school is the right place for you and if this is the path that you might best pursue. So I wanted to talk a little bit about MIT and our graduate programs. We have over 47. So I won't talk a lot about MIT in general since you all are MIT students, so you know a lot about the campus, but we'll point out a few things that are unique to the graduate program at MIT. So unlike many campuses, our graduate student population is more than that of the undergraduate population. So as of 2019, there were about 7,000 graduate students. We do have over 47 graduate programs distributed in 5 schools at MIT. And on the left, you can see a breakdown of what those graduate student enrollments are. So 57% doctoral students and 41% masters. And again, graduate students are 60% compared to 40% of undergraduates, which is a little bit unique about MIT. The other thing to keep in mind is that the admissions process is much different. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. But for MIT graduate programs, we are decentralized. And so each program makes their own admissions decision and has their own process for evaluating applicants. So this is really different from how undergraduates are admitted at MIT. And then also at MIT as a graduate student, you can apply to up to 3 programs during one cycle. So if you're interested in EECS, for instance, but you're also interested in mechanical engineering, then you can apply to both programs. And this would be maybe a strategy for increasing your odds of being admitted to graduate programs. But we will get into the admissions process more later on in the presentation. And a little bit more about enrollment statistics. So if you look to the left, each year or in 2020, we got almost 30,000 applications and about 3,700 or 3,600 applicants admitted. One thing to keep in mind is that you are applying to programs and you're not competing against the entire 29,000 applicants. So for instance, EECS typically, which is one of the largest departments here on our campus, receives about 10,000 applications and their admit rate is at about 6-7%. So it's competitive, but again, you're not competing against the entire pool of applicants. Women make up 35% of our graduate population and underrepresented minorities make up about 9%. And then international students make up 40% of our population. So this time I'm going to hand it over to Katherine, who's going to jump into the next part of the presentation, which is really about how you prepare for graduate education if you decide that that is the route that is right for you.
Thank you, Noelle. So as Noelle mentioned, applying to graduate school and applying to graduate school at MIT can be a competitive process. So we want to show you and talk you through a few of the key tips that will help you in preparing for graduate school and in preparing to become a strong candidate throughout your undergraduate career. So be it if you're a freshman right now, or even if you're a junior, there are a variety of things that you can do to improve your chances and to develop a very strong candidacy for a graduate program. The first point is that you should identify the skills in education that you want to launch your career. So the skills that you will need to pursue a career in biology versus the skills that you will need to pursue a career in maybe engineering will be different. So you want to think early on of what type of career you're interested in, so that then you can also decide whether a graduate program is the right choice for you and which specific graduate program you would be interested in. When you identify that, it will be much easier for you to build the coursework and experience in that field, so that then you can apply and be a strong candidate for the program that you're interested in. Secondly, knowing graduate school requirements and start planning early. So knowing these requirements generally can be very useful because you know what some of the things to focus on can be during your undergrad. So for example, taking courses in the area that you're interested in can be very useful. Maintaining a strong GPA can also be useful for your graduate school applications. Additionally, there can be requirements such as GRE or GRE subject tests and other types of tests that you will need to think about before you go through the graduate school application process. And for this, we recommend that you look ahead of time so that you're prepared and you can take these tests way before you need to actually carry out the process of filling out the application and other things that we'll discuss later on through the presentation. Third, seeking out relevant research experiences. So as Noelle mentioned, the PhD is very research heavy. You're essentially becoming an expert in a field of your own. And to do that, you need to demonstrate to faculty that will be reviewing your applications that you're very much interested in research and that you have the tools and the skills as well as abilities to be a strong researcher in the future. The only way in which you can showcase this is by seeking out research experiences and demonstrating that you've already tried it. So we recommend for you to seek these out early on, and we'll talk through that in the future as well. And lastly, develop your academic network. So having a strong network with faculty, with students that surround you, and really the entire MIT community can help strengthen both your understanding of what research areas you like and you might be interested in for graduate school, as well as your connectedness to potential opportunities that can be very helpful throughout the process. So in the next slide, we'll be going into more specifically how to seek out undergraduate research. So for undergraduate research, you may be wondering, where can I do this? So many of you may be involved in the URTC program at MIT or undergraduate research opportunities. And if you're not, I would definitely encourage you to seek those out. I'm sure, and I have UROPs right now, and I know that there are also remote opportunities. So I absolutely encourage you to seek those out if you're interested in graduate school. Besides that, there are summer research programs that you can find online. And that really provide a good way of learning more about a different school's perspective, what research is like in a different area, in a different school. And there are also undergraduate research programs that are sponsored by the NSF. And those can be really strong in helping build your research potential for graduate school. In addition to that, you can use your network. So former professors or mentors can guide you to opportunities that may be of interest for you in the areas that you have shown either strength or interest in. Semester research opportunities like the UROP program are highly encouraged. And besides the typical ways, so summer research programs or semester research opportunities, also think about how your internships and your class projects have been a way of demonstrating your research abilities. So for example, I didn't do summer research opportunities, but I did do internships where I worked on research problems that then could be transferred into my application to speak to my research abilities. So there are many other ways in which you can practice research and the thought process of research, even if it's not called a research opportunity. So thinking about these creatively can be very, very helpful. And things that would count for this can be capstone courses that are very common at MIT. In addition to these points, here we're highlighting a resource, which is the Pathways to Science website, which has tips, webinars, funding opportunities, and also lists to summer research program opportunities that you can find, and then you can decide which one you'd be interested in applying to. And once you've applied or decided to participate in these opportunities, some tips for how you can stand out through them is to first be diligent, proactive, and targeted. So having a student that's proactive, that's really interested in researching something specific, and that brings that to their mentor can be very rewarding both for the mentor as well as the student. So don't be afraid to think of new ideas, to have those conversations with your mentors or professors, and to be creative because they will appreciate it. Commit to the work that you can deliver. So oftentimes as undergraduates at MIT, we commit to doing a lot of work because we want to do it, but we may not have the capacity to do it. So one recommendation that we have is to make sure that you know what your capacity is and to commit to the work that you know you will be able to deliver on. That way, you won't be giving promises or false promises to your advisors, but you will also make sure that you focus on the projects and on the areas that are most important to you. Sometimes focusing on one area is more helpful than trying to cover all of the research areas that may be possible within your research project. And finally, staying curious and asking questions. Again, researchers, PhD students, and professors, they spend a lot of time working on one particular subject, and there's nothing more fun to them than talking about that subject and learning that someone else is interested in it. So make sure that you stay curious, you ask questions, and you are excited about the project that you're pursuing. So beyond seeking out these undergraduate research opportunities, networking is also very, very critical. By networking and strengthening your relationships across campus and across your academic network, you can significantly increase the opportunities that may come your way. So we encourage you to seek out mentors, connect with others. This can be others in various parts of your life, which can include communities on campus or even clubs that you're part of on campus, faculty, so the faculty that teach classes that you're interested in, or faculty that are in your department but may not have taught one of your courses. Friends, your friends can have connections to other faculty or other courses that you may not have realized you would be interested in, and graduate student mentors. So if you are already in a UROP opportunity, I would encourage you to talk to your graduate student about their process in applying to graduate school. Don't be afraid to ask them questions because they're excited to help. And this is really your circle of influence. You won't know which of these people that you're connected to will ultimately have a resource that will be really helpful to you. And in addition to that, it's really nice to get to know people and to learn from them, even if they don't have a connection later on that will be useful to you. But staying connected is very, very helpful throughout the process. So in the next slide, we actually have a resource for you. The Office of Graduate Education has graduate diversity ambassadors, which are graduate students that have essentially signed up to volunteer in various recruitment opportunities that the OGE has, and that have also agreed to talk to undergraduate students that are interested in graduate school and that want to learn more about their department. So here we have a picture with all of the graduate diversity ambassadors for this year, and you can actually find their profiles in the link on the slide, and you can connect with them. So if you find someone that is in the department that you're interested in, or maybe that went to the same undergrad school that you are interested in going to grad school for, feel free to reach out to these students. This is what they're there for, and they'll be very, very excited to talk to you. Besides graduate diversity ambassadors, it's also very important for you to really build those connections with faculty. So faculty will be your recommenders for graduate school. You will need 3 recommendation letters, and Noelle will speak to those requirements later on. But your advisors and your recommenders are ultimately the people that add credibility to your application and that already have formed connections across many universities and can add a stamp to your ability and to all of the work that you've done throughout your project. So make sure that you really try to build those connections and that you strengthen those relationships with your faculty. So go to office hours, ask questions, and don't be afraid of the faculty that you're connected with already. So now we'll go through a little bit on the graduate admissions process, so what it actually looks like. And this is a general overview of what it can look like from start to finish. The first will be exploring the program and faculty that are interesting to you. This will allow you to figure out what programs may be best suited for you. And oftentimes one of the differences between applying to graduate school and applying to undergrad schools is that in graduate school, it really matters what faculty are in those departments and what their focus areas are. So rather than necessarily selecting a school because of its ranking, it's really important to look at the faculty that are in a particular school, because if they do research that you're interested in, then that will make the most sense for you. Next, checking the academic requirements, as we talked about briefly before. Reviewing application requirements, which is very critical because you need to meet those requirements in order to apply. Checking additional resources such as application fee waivers that do exist. Oftentimes these graduate school applications can be costly. They can be up to $100 per application. So you should look to find for places where you can apply for fee waivers, get fee waivers that will reduce the burden, the financial burden of applying to graduate school. Submitting the application early to make sure to avoid the rush of applications that come in the day of. And once you've had your admissions decision, making sure that you visit the departments, talk to faculty, and talk to the diversity officers at the school so you can get the best understanding of what the graduate school you applied to is like. And finally, making an informed decision. So we'll go into this process a little bit more in detail, and I'll hand it off to Noelle, who will actually talk about the components of the graduate school application.
All right, thank you, Katherine. So once you have kind of thought about graduate school, you've learned more about what it's about, and then you've been actively preparing yourself, it's time for the actual application process. So during this section, I want to talk a little bit about the components of the graduate application and maybe the importance of those components in the admissions decision process. So the first thing that you want to do during the application process is highlight your academic achievements. And you do that by submitting a number of different items during the application process. So the first being your transcripts. So graduate schools are going to look at your GPA. Graduate coursework is a bit more challenging than undergrad, so it's reasonable for admissions committees to be looking at GPAs and seeing if applicants have what it takes to, at the very least, pass that coursework portion of graduate education, so what's happening in the first and second year. So having a strong GPA is a good indicator regarding if a student is going to be able to pass the coursework portion of the PhD program. And though many students ask, well, what GPA do I need to get into graduate school? And there is no answer for this. It depends on the type of program and competitiveness of the program. But a good rule of thumb is to try to do your best in your coursework. So striving to earn A's and B's is always a good thing. And then one thing to consider is that admissions committees will consider your major GPA and performance in required classes more heavily than your total GPA. So if you're applying for engineering programs, they're going to be looking closely at your engineering undergraduate coursework, maybe more so than your arts class. right? So they want to see how you perform in your major courses. The next thing to consider are standardized tests. So there are many different types of tests used in grad school admissions. For PhD programs, the most common tests are the GRE subject test, and the TOEFL. And so the purpose of these tests are to assess an applicant's knowledge in specific subject areas deemed necessary for graduate school. One thing that you should know about the GRE in particular is that many graduate programs are leaning away from using this as a metric for admissions, because what they've learned is the GRE is not a good indicator about how well a student will do during a graduate program. However, some do still require this, and so I want to talk with you a little bit about it in case you're applying to programs that require this for admission. So if you perform well on these tests, then that's great. If you don't, it's not the end all be all. There are other components of the graduate application that will speak to your abilities. So again, the rule of thumb is to do the best you can, but don't stress out about the GRE. And then finally, some programs, if you are not a native English speaker, will ask you to take English proficiency exams. So TOEFL is one of those exams that might be required of non-native English speakers. But do keep in mind at MIT, you can petition to forego this if you've received your undergraduate training at an English teaching institution. So where the primary language of instruction is English. So again, I do want to highlight that MIT Graduate School is very decentralized. And so the testing requirements are very department specific. And so the best thing to do is to look up what those requirements are within each specific program. And then finally, a CV. So the CV provides a summary of your experience and skills. They're usually submitted for jobs or when you're trying to gain admissions in academia or scientific research or medical fields, and are credential-based. So they provide a comprehensive listing of your education, certification, research experience, even professional affiliations and memberships. The next thing on the application that you want to do is provide credibility sources. So beyond your academic stats, your letters of recommendation might be the most influential aspect of your application to grad school. So the reason why is because your letter recommender should be speaking to your potential as a researcher and your potential and ability to succeed in graduate school. For most graduate programs, you need 3 letters of recommendation. And really, programs are looking to see if you are a right fit for their program. And so who better to ask than their peers in higher education? So letters of recommendation are super, super, super important part of the graduate application. A couple of things to keep in mind is you want to be extremely mindful of which professors you're going to ask to write your recommendation letters. How do those recommenders relate to your academic field? Perhaps having your biology professor write a recommendation for your law school application is less impactful than maybe, for instance, a poli-sci professor writing one. So it's, as Katherine mentioned, networking is extremely important and a way for you to connect with professors, especially within your discipline, so that you can begin to think about who will provide that credibility source, your letter of recommendation. The other thing that you want to highlight is your research experience. So the majority of the program, once you pass that structured portion of coursework, is researching. And so graduate programs are looking for meaningful research experiences. And really your letters of your letter recommender should also be speaking about you as a researcher. How did you perform in the research group? Are you dedicated? Are you asking curious and insightful questions? And so research experiences are very important. Um, you may want to have varied research experiences because then it helps you tease out what direction you ultimately might want to go in when pursuing graduate education. But alternatively, one long research experience is okay as well. So again, reaching inside of yourself and thinking about what is right for you. And then lastly, in some cases, programs will ask for portfolios and writing samples. Writing samples are especially more common in social behavior sciences and humanities graduate programs, but portfolios, for instance, are a requirement for Media Lab graduate program admissions. So again, checking in with the department and looking to see what is required for the application is important. And then lastly, you want to communicate your motivation. And so this is highlighted most frequently in the statement of objectives, which is what we have at MIT, or in some cases, a personal statement, which you might find within other graduate programs. So most graduate programs will ask you to either write a personal statement, respond to a specific prompt, or submit a statement of purpose. So personal statements are usually broad and open-ended, allowing you to share your academic and career goals, as well as your motivations for choosing that specific field. On the other hand, statements of purpose are typically more academic focused, and they ask you to explain your specific research interests and future projects. Few things to note: it is important that you tailor each one of these essays to the specific graduate program you're applying to. Mention departments you hope to engage in or specific faculty whose research labs you would like to join. Take time to study each grad school's unique mission and values, and then show your qualities, experience, and show how your qualities, experiences, and goals align with the school's mission or the mission of the department in your essay. This is the best way to demonstrate how you'll positively benefit a graduate program. So again, as I mentioned, you can apply to up to 3 graduate programs at MIT. Because we're decentralized, each program has their own statement of objectives prompt. So essentially, it is like completing 3 separate applications. And so that is something to keep in mind. Things to avoid when writing your personal statement or statement of objectives is avoiding cliches, things that come up over and over and over again that maybe might seem less authentic. 2, limiting interest to only one professor. So you definitely want to avoid applying to schools where there are only one professor that you could potentially work with. Anything can happen. The professor may not have funding to accept new students. The professor may be retiring. For something can happen where you're not able to join the research group. So you definitely want to target programs where there are multiple professors working on an research area of interest. CV, resume, and essay form. So the CV and resume are meant to be brief, so more brief than essays, and easier to digest. So making sure that you have an appropriate format is going to be important. And then finally, errors. So proofread, revise. You definitely don't want to have tiny mistakes that could have been caught had you had some others review your statement. So definitely make sure that you're reviewing, having others review and revise before submitting your statement of objectives. And then finally, just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of application materials. So there was a study done in 2016 by the Council of Graduate Schools where they surveyed different programs, and the programs let others know what aspects of the application were most important when screening applicants at various stages. And so for the initial screening, what they saw for doctoral programs is that academic transcripts, GRE test scores, and letter of recommendations were most important at the initial screening. And so it kind of indicated that programs are looking at more quantitative measures to kind of whittle down the applicant pool. At the final admissions decision, that somewhat changed. So academic transcripts were important, but the admissions committees were really looking at letters of recommendation. So as I mentioned, letters of recommendation are super, super important. And also the personal research statement, the place where you're able to authentically share yourself and your motivations. And then finally, we hadn't really talked about this, but some programs had interviews before gaining admissions. And so how you do on the interview portion of the application has also deemed important in making final admissions decisions. And then finally, at the funding decision metric. So as I mentioned, most graduate programs provide funding for the full cost of your tuition and support. What they found is that letters of recommendation and personal statements were most important in making funding decisions. So if you would like to learn more about this and the importance of application materials, I've linked here the source for this table. So I wanted to hand it over now to Katherine, who's going to talk about some other things that you might want to consider that are not formally a part of the admissions process, but things that you should be thinking about when applying.
Thank you, Noelle. So once you're going through the application process, you need to worry about all of the things Noelle mentioned, but there are some, again, additional things and opportunities that you may consider that can make you a very strong student that's starting in graduate school, and that can also add some kind of cherry on top to your resume and your CV as you are developing your academic career. So in general, for PhD programs, schools will cover all of the costs of your research through an RA or a TA-ship. However, you can apply for research fellow or for graduate student fellowships that can supplement this funding sources. And these fellowships can be really great as a way to practice writing your SOP, because these fellowships are due earlier than typical application deadlines. They can also be a great way of getting some prestige and some recognition in your CV, which is always nice. And they provide you with the flexibility, because if you get funding from a source that is not directly from your professor, they can give you a lot of flexibility in the path that you take your research in. So for example, if you have a Ford fellowship, like one of the ones that's highlighted in this slide, they will fund a certain amount of years of your PhD. And it's in those years that you're funded, because you're getting funding from these fellowships, then you can have some flexibility to do research in areas that are not necessarily directly tied to, for example, a company-funded project in your lab. Some examples of fellowships that you might want to consider are the NSF GRFP. There's also the National GEM Consortium Fellowship, which I want to especially highlight. It's for underrepresented minority students, but it also provides funding for master's programs if you get the fellowship. And this is something that's not as common because typically these fellowships are for PhD programs. And there's also the Ford Pre-Doctoral Fellowship, which is given by the National Academies of Science and Engineering. So while you're going through your application process and while you're thinking about graduate school, I would strongly encourage you to think about graduate fellowships and other ways in which you can fund your PhD. That being said, you do not need a graduate fellowship to get into a program, but it can help. In addition to that, once you've gone through the application process and you've gotten many successful outcomes, you need to strategize in figuring out how to choose the best graduate program for you. So first, we encourage you to strategize in thinking, what are the things that I need to know to figure out what's the right decision for me? Visit either remotely or in person, depending on the situation, so that you can get that information and talk to as many people as possible and ask all of the questions. Don't be shy, because this is the time for you to figure out what the school is like and what the best school for you will be. Of course, you want to get the complete picture. So some things to consider are the program length. So how long does it typically take students to graduate from this program? Sometimes the program length can vary by years, depending on the school that you're applying to. Qualifying exams and required coursework. So certain programs have coursework that may be more tied to the areas that you're interested in, or they may have less requirements. And this can definitely be a part of your decision, because graduate school is something that you decided to do, not something that you needed to do. So at this point, you have to be picky about which program is best fitted for you. Community, housing, and location. It's okay to think about the weather, to think about what the community is like around you, and to also think of housing. Housing can vary across schools, and the type of housing that's provided can also be very, very different. Funding and resources. Some schools offer internal fellowships, and that can be a very strong incentive to go to a school compared to another school. So having all of that information as you are applying and as you're deciding which school to go to will be important as well. And the most critical piece of information that you need to know is which faculty are at the school that can be your potential advisors, and do they have research that you're genuinely interested in? Also, one recommendation that I generally give is to choose a school that has multiple faculty that you may be interested in working with, just because you never know what the funding situation might be when you actually enroll. And many times faculty cannot make a commitment to a student before they enroll in the program. So you don't want to choose a school for one single professor if you don't have certainty that you will be able to join that lab. So expanding a little bit more on community and what to expect at MIT in the next slide. Of course, you will have the opportunity to do a lot of cutting edge research and have various interesting, diverse, and hardworking students surrounding you. There are many, many resources, including financial services, career services, housing services and support. There's a graduate student council that organizes various types of events and that sends out a calendar of events every week. There's much leadership development. You can participate in many student groups, and that can be a very enriching part of your graduate education. There are also international travel opportunities, international fellowships that you can go into. For example, MISTI, which is something, the MIT International Initiative, where you can travel to a different country to do research there. This also applies to graduate students. So some of those opportunities that exist for undergrads can also translate to graduate school and really enrich your experience as a graduate student at MIT. Of course, there are various other resources which are very important, like medical, health and wellness resources, childcare services for families, and affinity groups, such as BGSA, the Black Graduate Student Association, the Women's Association at MIT, and LGBTQ as well. Now I'll hand it over to Noelle, who will talk about one specific very important resource that we have, which is the Office of Graduate Education, that we are both working in.
Thank you, Katherine. So I just wanted to end, and I'll go a little bit quickly because we only have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that we were able to answer a couple of questions. But again, we work in the Office of Graduate Education. Our office supports the 7,000 current graduate students here at MIT. And our mission is to provide institute-wide support and to serve students, faculty, and staff to make graduate education at MIT empowering, exciting, holistic, and transformative. And so we have a number of different teams that work in different areas. I'll highlight one area, the Office of Grad Support. who provide advice and counsel on a variety of issues, including faculty and student relationships and conflict negotiation, funding, academic progress, and even interpersonal concerns. We encourage you to check out our office and see all of the ways in which we support current graduate students as well. And also when thinking about other graduate programs, making sure that those resources are in place. And so that on that note, I will end our presentation. We definitely also encourage you to follow up with our office, and here is our contact information. And to also follow us on social media. And at this time, we'll pause for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Noelle and Katherine, for the great presentation. And then for our first question is asked by Eric. Do you think that research experience and publications give you an edge for specific graduate programs such as business, for example, like Sloan School of Management at MIT?
Katherine, do you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. So it definitely depends on which graduate program you're applying to. So if I understood the question correctly, you mentioned the LGO program at MIT.
Yes.
So the LGO program is a dual program with an MBA as well as an engineering component to it. It's a master's in engineering and MBA. So in that case, having research experience is especially valuable because you are applying for an engineering degree. If you're applying to something like an MBA, that will be a little bit different from what we've discussed today. But this presentation was a little bit more geared at master's and PhD programs in engineering and science fields.
Okay. And another question is asked by Vivian. So, like, do you happen to have any advice for MD or PhD programs? Like any advice?
Yeah, I can try to tackle that a little bit. So MD, PhD programs are a little bit different because true MD, PhD programs, so medical scientist training programs, are way more competitive than PhD programs. The reason being is because they are fully funded in terms of the medical school portion and your PhD portion. A couple of things that these programs look like are emphasis on the MCAT. So they are looking at those MCAT scores. And I know that you have to be in top percentiles in order to be competitive for the MD PhD programs. So definitely you're going to want to make sure that you're studying for the MCAT because that score is extremely important. Now, typically, once you're admitted to the medical school and or MD PhD program, you're allowed to do the PhD portion. And so most MD PhD programs have agreements with PhD programs so that once you're automatically admitted into the MD PhD program, you're then able to select the PhD program that you're going to do the PhD in. Couple of things to consider is that some programs only allow you to do the PhD in certain areas, where some programs allow you to do the PhD portion in a variety of areas. And so thinking about what you're most interested in getting the PhD in would help inform your decision in terms of what MD PhD programs to apply for. The admissions process more in line follows medical school admissions and not the PhD admissions process, which happens in early spring. So there are key differences when applying to that dual degree program. Research experience is important though, so you want to make sure you also have research experience and strong letters of recommendation. And then finally, this is a program where there definitely is an interview process, and the interview process is extremely important for admissions. So I'll end there on that question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for our next question, are there any opportunities for scholarships in graduate schools, like specifically for Master of Science programs?
Yeah, I can take that question. So thank you, Eric, for the question. And there are. So one of the fellowships that I mentioned is the GEM Consortium Fellowship, which I would encourage you to Google and learn more about. That fellowship will cover your master's in I think, engineering or science field. And the way in which that fellowship works is that after you apply, you get matched with a company and you do an internship with that company after your last year of undergrad, and that company will fund part of your graduate school degree, and then you also build that connection with the company in case you want to work there in the future. So it's a really great resource. And one additional thing about the GEM fellowship is that even if you don't get the fellowship, you get fee waivers to all of the schools that GEM is connected with by being an applicant to the GEM fellowship. So I would definitely encourage you to look into that fellowship because it can be really a great resource even for applicants. There may be additional fellowships that also cover the cost of master's programs, but I'm not directly aware of those, but that's one example that does.
Mm-hmm. So thanks. So and next question is asked by Noelle. So are there services only available for students who attend MIT as an undergraduate student? And how does someone who doesn't attend a research institute make those connections and develop a research background that is required?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and we're often, our office often thinks about how will students have access if their undergraduate institutions don't provide meaningful research experiences. And so here at MIT, we do have a summer research program, and in fact, it is not open to current MIT students. It's called MIT Summer Research Program, which provides a 9-week research experience for students to learn what graduate school is about, to build their community, to have some professional development in the areas, for instance, of scientific communication, and to work one-on-one with an MIT faculty. And there are lots of programs out there like that, which would allow students that may not be able to do research at their home institution to seek those summer research opportunities, as well as maybe internship opportunities throughout the school year or visiting student programs. And so within the presentation, there was one resource that we shared. We really like this resource because it has about a compilation of about 700 internship opportunities for undergraduates. It's a database. It's called Pathways to Science. And it also allows students to sort opportunities by various filters. So for instance, for students that are interested in a particular area, or maybe students that are interested in a summer research or opportunities for international students.
Okay, and then the next one is that for the undergraduate summer research programs that you mentioned during your presentation, are they open to internationals or Canadian students?
Yeah, some are open to international students and some are not. It's dependent upon how the program is funded. So the good thing about the Pathways to Science resource that we shared is that you can filter for opportunities for international students. For the MIT Summer Research Program, for instance, it is open to international students who attend U.S. Institutions, undergraduate institutions. So there are others out there like that. Yes.
Okay. So next one, if for example, like if a student's coursework is suffer like slightly because of like our commitments, for example, like research, like is that also taken into account when doing like the reviewing applications, and or is like better to have like higher GPA but like less extracurriculars?
I can take that question. So the process is really meant to be a very holistic process. So they will take into account your GPA, but they will also take into account your research experience. And both of them kind of can balance each other out. I would recommend for you to definitely pay attention to your GPA and try to do as well as you can in courses. However, if your GPA suffers slightly, it can be okay for that to happen because they have many other aspects of the application that they're considering in the review and in the whole process. For example, if you're working in a lab and you've been able to do significant progress in that lab, in the research in that lab, that will add to your application a lot. So I wouldn't encourage you to stop pursuing that opportunity even if it's a little bit tricky to handle. Lastly, if there is a very big drop in your GPA or some major kind of disruption of something that happened that you want to, I would encourage you to explain that in your application. There can be areas in the application where you can actually specify why that might have happened, what were the circumstances, and that can help. But in short, the process is very holistic. All aspects matter, and no singular aspect will be the only one that you should focus on.
Okay. So next question: how does one talk about the research lab they are interested in, and or the professor they want to work with? Like, should they just talk about their past research papers, or like some aspect of their work?
So when reaching out to a research lab or a professor, you definitely want to make the connection intentional and want to make sure that the professor doesn't feel like you are reaching out to all faculty in that university. So you want to make it specific enough. I would encourage you to maybe read about the research before you reach out, mention the areas of research in their lab that you have been interested in or that stood out to you and why that makes it interesting to you and why you might want to pursue research in that lab. That can be a really good way of connecting to a faculty member and then learning more about the opportunities that they have in their lab.
Okay, so next question is like, do college clubs like matters at all? For example, like engineering clubs or other clubs that with leadership positions, like for example, engineering labs, like do they clubs do they like matter to for the graduate school admission?
Yeah, I think sorry, Catherine. I think as Catherine was mentioning, I think, again, all aspects of the application matter and will be taken into consideration. One thing to keep in mind is that you want to draw connections between how your activities will benefit you or have contributed to your potential as a graduate student. So if you were, head chef in the Baker's Club, you have to be prepared to talk about how that applies or how that's related or how that has prepared you for graduate education. But in general, programs like to see students with varied portfolios. They like to see well-rounded students, and having leadership experience is always a plus. But again, it's a matter of showing how that has prepared you for graduate education or shaped kind of your direction or path.
Okay, so next question. Is it common for PhD programs to have interviews?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you should go ahead, Noelle.
I guess it just depends on the program. It really just depends on the program. So I'm a biologist. I had an interview process for my particular program. And so I think it's just a matter of, again, researching the program and seeing what those requirements are for admissions. Typically, the interview happens after there has been some type of whittling down of applicants. So there'll be some initial screenings first, and then finalists are the ones that are typically invited for an interview. So if 100 people apply to the program, all 100 people are not going to get an interview, but more like some segments of that applicant pool.
Okay. This is the last question of the day because we almost run out of time. So is it necessary to have a master's degree first for applying to PhD electrical engineering and computer science?
Catherine?
Okay, I'll take this one. It depends. The short answer is I believe no. There are many students in my program that did get a master's and then pursued a PhD at MIT separately. However, oftentimes in these programs, you can get your master's on the way to the PhD. So for example, in the program that I'm in material science, after 2 years, you can opt in to get a master's. So you need to write a thesis, a master's thesis, and then pursue a project that can be kind of tangentially related for your PhD. So you don't necessarily have to have a master's before applying to the PhD. And this is, thank you for the question, Alex, because this is something that definitely comes up a lot. And if you know that you're interested in the PhD, I would encourage you to apply to the PhD right away. And you will go through courses early on that will kind of build that master's knowledge that then you can apply towards the PhD, but it will become a shorter process.
Yeah. And wait, near my light, because there's only one more question left. So asked by Ding Fan Chen, if a student takes computer science, computer engineering in the graduate school, then when take biomedical engineering for a master's degree, what courses the student request to take?
Does that mean what additional courses might they need to take if they're pivoting to BE from computer engineering? If that is the question, again, it's about looking at the admissions requirements. A lot of times for programs, they want you to have basic knowledge of maybe perhaps engineering concepts. And so often they won't say, well, you have to take this, and this. But oftentimes, if you come from any type of engineering background, those courses that you've taken might be sufficient enough to do well in the coursework and to be admitted into the program. So again, you'll want to follow up with each program and look at what those core requirements courses are. And then you want to start doing a little planning ahead just to make sure you can complete those courses in time for that applying and application cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Thank you, Noelle and Katherine, for this wonderful presentation, and thank you for everyone who attended, and thank you very much.